So there's an interesting development. On November 29th, the Salt Lake Tribune announced that Rocky Anderson, the mayor, former mayor, or present mayor, I'm not sure, of Salt Lake City, will be announcing his candidacy for the 2012 presidential nomination of a new national political party. So he's going to be calling it the Justice Party. He was interviewed, on Current TV last night, I think it was, by TYT's Cenk Uygur. I've got that clip here. Let's watch that clip.
Rocky Anderson, he's the former mayor of Salt Lake City, former Democrat, and he's actually going to run as a third-party candidate in the presidential elections. Let me give you one, before we go to him, one quick quote to give you a sense of why he's so upset with the Democrats. He says, quote, "The Constitution has been eviscerated while Democrats have stood by with nary a whimper. It's a gutless, unprincipled party bought and paid for by the same interests that buy and pay for the Republican Party." Well, I couldn't agree more, but those are strong words. Rocky Anderson joins us now. Rocky, how are you?
It's great to be with you, and thank you. I listened to that earlier story. It is so fundamental that the American people understand that both of these parties, and Congress and the White House, are on the take, and it's the American people who are getting burned in the process.
So let's talk about that. I mean, I read an interview that you did earlier where you were talking about telecom immunity. I mean, I don't know any other presidential candidate who's talking about telecom immunity, but that's the reason I love that is because that's such an important issue. You use this as an example of Democratic collusion. What do you mean by that?
I mean that the Republicans and the Democrats are completely in bed with the same folks, these corporate interests who are in control of our government. The reason I'm doing this and the reason the Justice Party was formed is so that we can take the reins of our government and make sure that those in Washington are doing what's in the public interest rather than what's in the narrow interests of these corporations who really do have control of our government. This is a plutocracy. It's the control of government by the very wealthy at a time. I mean, this is the new Gilded Age. Never as great an economic disparity in this country since the 1920s, and it's getting worse. And Wall Street, they put more money into the president's campaign last time around than ever in the history of this country, and it's just getting worse.
Rocky,
and so what does he do?
Rocky, you know, the problem here is that I agree with you 100% and disagree 0%, okay? Normally, I like to, go back and forth a little bit, but look, I totally hear you on that. Now, the question, though, is, and a lot of people are going to ask you, wait a minute, if you get into a race and you're so reasonable and so progressive, won't that take votes away from Obama, in which case make it easier for a Republican to win?
And that's a great question, and it's actually that consideration that kept me from getting involved in a third party or as a candidate until I realized that when we're driven by the fear of the lesser of two evils being defeated and not opting for a major change in the system, we're going to be stuck in this no matter what. The Republicans and Democrats, regardless of who's in power, they won't provide the international leadership that's required on climate change. They won't really stand up to Wall Street. Like you said, and people need to understand this, we have a certain narrow privileged class in this country that not only have almost all of the wealth, they're excused from violations of the law, sometimes felonies. President Obama, you mentioned the telecom immunity. When he was a senator, he told us before he received the Democratic nomination that he would join a filibuster against a bill that was tailored to provide immunity retroactively for the crimes committed by the telecommunications companies when they worked along with the administration in the illegal surveillance program, doing surveillance on our telephone calls and on our emails. Totally un-American, subversive to the very core of our constitutional rights. And then when he won the Democratic nomination, then Senator Obama turned 180 degrees and voted along with the majority of those in Congress to grant that immunity.
Rocky,
now,
I was covering that, and I was covering the race, and that's when I knew we were in a lot of trouble. Like
I did too.
You know, and
Yep.
it didn't. You know, at that point, your choices were Obama or McCain, so there's no question I was going to go for Obama, keeping it real, right? But at the same time, here's a guy whose mentor was Joe Lieberman in the Senate, and then that did that 180, and I thought, uh-oh, we got trouble here, right? But Rocky, you know, so if you say to me who should be president right now, Rocky Anderson, Barack Obama, or, you know, name the, you know, Newt Gingrich, whatever. I mean, it's the easiest choice in the world. You know, I don't pretend to be one of those fake, you know, guys on TV who was like, oh, I'm a journalist. I am, you know, I don't know. I don't have any opinions. No, I have an opinion. Boom. Rocky Anderson. It's too easy. But how are you going to win? Okay, so I know you're taking only $100 and less. Buddy Romer, we had on the show the other day, he's running on the Republican side, he's doing the same thing, and honestly, he's getting slaughtered. So how can you overcome these insane odds?
How did the Egyptian people overthrow their dictatorship? And by the way, we do have a dictatorship in this country. We have the pretense of a democracy, but we know our government is run by the dictatorship of these powerful, wealthy interests. How did they do it? They put their lives on the line. They did it by forming a grassroots movement. They stuck with it, and they coordinated it through social media. That's exactly how we're going to do it. You don't need a lot of television advertising, these hundreds of millions of dollars. Now President Obama is saying they're going to raise over $1 billion. That is obscene. We, the people, can do this if we hang together, if we don't cave into our fear of being a spoiler for the lesser of two evils, if we say we're going to choose another radically different way where our government will actually advocate, stand up, and promote the interests of the people of this country,
Rocky,
rather than the corporate interests who have bought our Congress and our White House.
And remember, everybody, Rocky was the mayor of Salt Lake City in Utah, the reddest state there is. So there's hope in that regard. But one last really quick question. If you do win by some miracle, keep it real, right? It's gonna, if you win, it is definitely going to require some sort of miracle. Is your first priority campaign finance reform?
It's getting the corrupting influence of money out of both the electoral system and our system of governance. Absolutely, because that is the reason we don't have universal health care. It's the reason we don't have leadership on climate change. It's the reason we have stranglehold by the military-industrial complex over our government and our budget. So yes, absolutely, we need to clean that up, and even if it takes a constitutional amendment, it would be the healthiest thing that we could possibly do for the United States government.
All right, the other thing I'm looking forward to is the convention of the Justice Party, which, by the way, is an awesome name, where they start chanting, Rocky, Rocky, Rocky. All right, Rocky Anderson, by all means, best of luck to you in your presidential bid.
Hart knew what was coming. Counters. With a clothesline and a cover.
Well, well, that's refreshing, is it not? To see a progressive candidate who understands that both of the parties are bull, whose centrist leaning comes from a very conservative state but is progressive. So here's a guy who uses the language of the common people, able to actually relate to the common people, and not just the fringe lunatic, right-wingers like Ron Paul is relating to, who want to talk about, FEMA camps and all this stuff, which may or may not be true, whatever. Here's somebody who can just appeal to the average person. Somebody who's speaking the language that we need to hear, talking about the corporations, and not just the government as being some big issue. Like, as soon as we make the government smaller, then everything's gonna be fine and all our problems are gonna go away. And these elite interests are going to be reined in and stop abusing us. No. We have to go after the elites themselves. Those elites who control the government. Just like he is saying here. And so, by him being able to speak to the people and speak clearly the problems at hand and come from a strong libertarian, but also left-leaning. Like a libertarian leftist perspective is just perfect. That's exactly what the majority of the people really want. They want leftist policies. They also want the Constitution to be respected. But we all voted for these leftist policies, like healthcare, Medicaid, food stamps, etc. Ron Paul's going to eviscerate all these things. We shouldn't destroy the government. We should reform the government. And I think that's what this guy is saying, is that we should get the political, the money out of the political sphere, the economic interest out, and even rein in, these criminals before we can reform the government. Otherwise, there's nothing to reform. It's just criminals there. So I'm going to read a little bit from Wikipedia's page about this guy's background because it's very interesting. He seems to be somebody who I resonate with very much here on Esoteric Worldviews, as being a very philosophical-minded person, it seems like, and very ethically guided, very intelligent and very enlightened type person. So here, I'm going to read this. Rocky Anderson was born in Logan, Utah. He was raised a Mormon and was a practicing member of the predominant religion in Logan, which is Mormonism. But he describes his disagreement with certain doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ, particularly the denial before 1978 of the priesthood and temple ceremonies for African Americans, whose dark skin, according to the Mormon Church, was the mark of Cain. And the teachings of Brigham Young that a white person who mixed his seed with a Negro should be killed. Anderson has described his belief from a young age that the LDS teaching of personal moral abdication through obedience to people in positions of authority was dangerous and counter to the principle of personal moral responsibility, in which Anderson deeply believes. Anderson studied ethics, political philosophy, and religious philosophy in college. He also explored theological issues in depth. Among the unique doctrines of the Mormon Church is that worthy men and women can become gods and goddesses, and determined that the best course for him was intensely considered ethical choices, rather than a set moral, set moral guideposts for his life, and focus on trying to live accordingly without regard to the doctrines of organized religion. So he's saying that, almost like the Buddha, in the way that he says that personal observations of the truth are higher than any dogma. So this is really cool that this person has stepped up in the left, and also he's making a third party in order to capture the momentum of the Tea Party. It also says on this page that what he's doing is trying to capture the momentum, not the Tea Party, but the Occupy movement. It says right here that he has discussed the formation of this political party, the Justice Party, with Margaret Flowers, who's a medical doctor and proponent of a single-payer health plan. And this other person, Kevin Zeese, who's an organizer of the Occupy DC movement. So he's been discussing this political party with the Occupy movement. So it seems that it's possible that he could be using the tide of the Occupy movement to start the formation of a new political party. Just like, certain politicians were using the Tea Party's momentum, like Bachman and Ron Paul, etc. He seems to be wanting to capture the momentum of the Occupy movement. While expressing the importance of some fundamental moral lessons he learned as a young member of the Mormon Church, and while describing his values he places on his Mormon heritage, Anderson has spoken out about the LDS Church discrimination against gays and lesbians, comparing its public campaigns against equality for members of the GLBT community with its history of racial discrimination. Anderson has written about his views on the issues and appeared in the documentary film A Mormon Proposition. Interesting. He played a lead guitar in a rock and roll band. What else? After reading existentialist literatures and several work on ethics, religious philosophy, and political philosophy, he had a powerful epiphany. We cannot escape responsibility. There's no sitting out moral decisions. And whenever we refuse to stand up against wrongdoing, we're actually supporting the status quo. That's his quote. That's really genius. He's basically come to an occult understanding of responsibility, meaning that inaction is the same as wrong action. Being inactive in choices of moral responsibility is just the same as taking the wrong choice. In other words, that you have to be morally responsible. You are obligated karmically to be morally responsible to everything and everyone around you. I can't believe that I'm even going through this, just having researched this. This is the first time that I looked at this page. But here's where the video, the path that the video has turned. So I like it, and I like this guy so far. I love everything I'm hearing about him. And he would get my vote. Shit. So definitely worth looking into this person, Rocky Anderson, and checking out his Justice Party, perhaps as a possible third-party presidential candidate in 2012.